Welcome into the Rock Talk Studio, the podcast that answers the question, is this rock and roll book or documentary worth your time and money? And today, the spotlight falls on the documentary Revival 69, the concert that rocked the world, which I'll review, I will rate, and I'll determine if this doc is for you. And then, I got all the hot news you don't want to miss out on about just announced new books and documentaries, including projects featuring Elton John, the Tedeschi Trucks Band, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, Robyn Hithcock, and Bob Dylan. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. How can a festival in Toronto in 1969 go from a non-event to all of a sudden the biggest thing in the world? This show became Toronto's Woodstock. And it's a multi-layered story with a ton of wild characters playing major parts throughout this absolutely fascinating documentary. Man, I don't even know where to begin with this one. So let's start with the two guys who came up with the idea for this concert. And that's the promoters, John Brower and Ken Walker. The names probably are not going to impress you, but what will is their age. They were 23 years old at the time of this. And they needed to come up with a show for the fall season, so they started putting together this lineup of rock and roll legends. Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Bo Diddley, Little Richard, Gene Vincent. I mean, incredible talent. You've got the early godfathers of rock and roll here. But they needed a little more punch, so they took it a step further, and they combined it with more of the current talent, and that was Alice Cooper. And then they scored big with securing the Doors as the headlining act. Just a great day of music, but only one problem. 2 weeks before the show, they'd only sold 2,000 tickets. Okay, maybe more than one problem. And this was a big one because what they had to do, they had to borrow money to finance the show. And the only people they could find to lend them the cash was a notorious local motorcycle gang. There are a few Hail Marys that promoter Brower and Walker had to throw to pull this thing off. One was asking the motorcycle gang for the money, obviously. And two was to reach out to California for help. So who did they call? Two of the biggest names in promotion at that time. One was LA's most popular DJ and scenester, Rodney Bingenheimer. And one was the one and only manager, producer, Kim Fowley. The two actually agreed and then came to town, storming local radio stations, record labels, record stores, calling in all their connections to try and kick up some ticket sales for the show. No luck. And with time running out, it was Foley who actually came up with the biggest Hail Mary of them all. Let's call John Lennon, see what he's up to. Foley thought that because Lennon was such a big fan of early rock and roll, he loved Gene Vincent, he loved Chuck Berry, all those guys. Maybe he would want to come and possibly MC the festival. No way, right? The Beatles just broke up. Lennon is kind of licking his wounds with Yoko. Fowley says, why not? One last-ditch effort to save this thing. And Lennon not only takes the call, but he agrees to come. And he adds a little kicker to the deal. He's going to throw together a band in the next couple of days, and he's going to play. And who he's come up with in the band is Clapton on guitar, Klaus Voormann on bass, Alan White on drums. So kind of a superstar band. They've never played together before. He's never played with them. He's going to play with a band for the first time other than the Beatles. So that sets the stage right there for this incredible documentary that actually goes to another level when famed filmmaker D.A. Pennebaker decides to join. And he comes and he films the whole thing. And there are a lot of highlights in the 80 minutes of this documentary, but the performances that were captured are absolutely rock and roll history. Bo Diddley said of his set, "I've never heard an audience scream or cheer for me like that. Ever. It almost brought me to tears." Alice Cooper said the Toronto Festival actually launched his band. I don't want to give away anything, but there is a scene in here that shows and documents why Cooper's career took off after this show. The performance was way over the top. Another cool thing about Alice in this is his band and him actually ended up being the backup band for Gene Vincent that day. Robbie Krieger of The Doors calls Chuck Berry's performance one of the best rock shows he's ever seen. So the performances are just amazing in this documentary. And that's even before John Lennon's set. There is a bunch of really great Lennon footage of him coming to the show, arriving at the show, backstage, on the plane to the show. The amount of great, insightful video can't be understated. This is really a treasure. If you don't believe me, well, you can ask Geddy Lee of Rush, who was there in the audience, age 16 and on acid. Great bunch of Geddy Lee interviews that are also included in this documentary where he talks about his experience. The doc does come to a screeching halt, though. Major pun intended, as Lennon lets Yoko Ono do one of her screaming songs at the end of his set. And the look on Clapton's face is priceless when she starts screaming. Also, Jim Morrison wouldn't allow any filming of the Doors set, so there's no Doors footage, which is a bummer. It's really too bad, too, because this was the show right after the Florida concert where Morrison was arrested and pulled off stage for alleged indecent exposure. It was really one of the only shows that they could book after that Miami show. So unfortunately, no Doors footage either. One more step I want to take with this documentary, and that is to not only stamp the official Rock Talk Studio rating on Revival 69, but I also want to talk a little bit more about the rating I gave it and why it is one of the most interesting ratings in the last year. Okay, Rock Talk Studio rating time. Let's go ahead and rate this doc. And then I want to get into it a little bit more, take a look at a few things that stood out in this. But first up, here's how I rate rock and roll books and documentaries. It's a 1 through 4 system. A 1 is a front row center. This is highly unique. This is something that really sets itself apart from other works. It's one of a kind. It'll go down as an instant classic. It's not to be missed. That's front row center. A 2, that's a floor seat. Highly recommended with a ton of reasons why it's a don't miss documentary or read. 3 is a load seat. That's okay. It's good. There are things that I enjoyed about it. There are things that I found lacking. A recommendation might even lie in the type of fan you are about the subject. And 4, you're in the nosebleeds, baby. Revival 69, the concert that rocked the world, is a front row center number 1. I haven't given out a front row center in a long time, but this one definitely deserves it. I was absolutely blown away with it. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was just the story and the way it's told. My jaw was dropped like through the first, almost 60 minutes of this 80-minute documentary. It's just one thing after another that's just hard to believe that it happened. And it's hard to believe that this is concert that's really not talked about. I personally did not know a lot about this concert. I knew of it, but I didn't know it was this. I didn't know these great rock and rollers were out there just like playing like it was their last show they've ever played in their life. And then, this Alice Cooper stuff with him back in Gene Vincent, the Doors being there after their arrest, and the Lennon stuff alone is just mind-blowing. This deserves a front row center all the way. I highly recommend you go out and check this out. I think I paid like $4.99 for it on Prime. I couldn't find it anywhere else. It's worth $4.99. It's worth $14.99. It's worth $24.99. Don't miss this. Revival 69. Update time on my quest for 25 5-star reviews on my Apple podcast directory. For those of you who are new to the show, I'm currently on a quest to get 5-star reviews, 25 of them, on my Apple podcast. And the reason behind it is there's a couple reasons. One, it raises my profile. So when someone's looking for a show, something new, and they stumble across the Rock Talk Studio, they see a lot of reviews, 25 5-star reviews or even more. I think they're more likely to check out the show. Also, it helps me get ranked on different ranking systems. So the more reviews I get, the better off I'm going to be. So that's what I'm up to. I'm trying to get my reviews up. So I'm going to ask you to please take just a few moments to give me a 5-star review. I started out with 12. I currently have 15. So thanks to the 3 that were just put up in the last couple of weeks. I really appreciate anybody who takes the time out and gives me that 5-star review and that ranking. Let's see what I can do for next week. Let's get this thing up to 25 5-star reviews on Apple. Thank you. I appreciate everybody who's going to go a little bit further and help me out with this. Speaking of going a little bit further and helping somebody out, I want to help somebody out by telling you about their podcast because I really enjoy this podcast. It's the My Weekly Mixtape podcast, and it's really cool. It's about curating and putting together mixtapes. And I know myself always loved putting together mixtapes. I worked in the music industry in Los Angeles for years, and I used to get a bunch of promos. I used to get a bunch of free CDs, LPs, cassettes, and I always loved to put together mixtapes for my brother who lived back in Connecticut. And I would paint the covers, or I would do some crazy, messages inside the mixtape. We all remember, for those of you who remember mixtapes, how cool a mixtape was. This is a cool show about mixtapes. Here's the trailer from Brian of My Weekly Mixtape.
What does the word mixtape mean to you?
It was an art form.
Trying to woo them with my fantastic and eclectic taste in music.
If somebody gave you a mixtape, you felt like you really meant something to that person.
Mixtape to me is love.
My Weekly Mixtape is a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Tune in to hear themed playlist curations.
No one in the history of anyone should ever put Pantera after Derek and the Dominoes, but here we are.
This is going to be the weirdest playlist ever created, and I love it.
One-on-one sit-downs with the artists that made our mixtape special in the first place.
It's Bill Gibson with Huey Lewis and the News.
I'm Art from the band Everclear.
This is Kenny Wayne Shepherd.
This is Frank Turner, and good Lord, you've made the right choice today.
And so much more. My Weekly Mixtape is a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Listen now at myweeklymixtape.com or by searching My Weekly Mixtape wherever you listen to podcasts.
Check out the podcast My Weekly Mixtape and leave Brian a 5-star review on his Apple Podcast too. He definitely deserves it. Cool show. All right, you know what time it is next. It's time for all that book buzz and documentary news. Okay, let's talk about all those new things that just came out. Let's get you caught up on books and documentaries you don't want to miss. All these new projects that were just announced and released. And this week, it's books. It's mainly books this week, but there is some huge documentary news. It just broke right before I recorded this, so I will fill you in on that and what I know about that so far. But again, let's start with some books. And we're going to start with Elton John. Farewell, Yellow Brick Road, Memories of My Life on Tour is a new book that documents Elton's memories of his last tour. 330 shows. That thing went on for a long time. 2018 to 2023, there was a COVID break in there. It just made me think, like, whose last tour that was, prolonged. I can only think of Kiss. And I looked it up. That was a long tour, 4 years, 2019 to 2023. So Elton, you got him beat. Nice. This book is described as a visual journey through the Farewell Yellow Brick Road tour, but it also has Elton reaching back to reflect on key moments in his career, reminiscing about, just the beginning of the time when he started playing out. It's more about a tour history. And that's interesting. So even though its focus is on the last tour, it sounds like we're getting a little bit more than that. It would be interesting to see how much more, but we'll see when it comes out. It also has a bunch of Elton's personal archives of posters, sketches, never before seen photographs, and postcards. This one is, though, a little ways out. Mark your calendar, release date, September 20th. Vinyl fans, yes, you who love digging through those crates, there's a new book out for you by author Christopher Long based on his popular weekly Inc19.com column. It's called Garage Sale Vinyl. That's the name of the book, and it offers Long's lively analysis on his favorite album finds as he rummages through garage sales, thrift stores, flea markets, anywhere he can find some vinyl. The vinyl finds are enhanced by his personal feel-good stories, and it comes with commentary from a bunch of famed musicians and artists. There is even a foreword by one of my favorite new guitarists, Bella Perrone of Plush. I just started reading this, so it's a little early to tell you what I think about it, New book out now, though, for vinyl fans, Garage Sale Vinyl. Next book is about one of my favorite artists of all time, easily in my top 5, and that's this new book called Conversations with Tom Petty by Paul Zollo. The original version of this book came out in 2012, and that was the first authorized book on Tom Petty, and the only one in Tom's words. This is an expanded edition. So this new edition is going to include additional interviews, articles, reviews. It also has a foreword and features photos and captions by Tom himself. Zollo conducted a series of in-depth interviews with Tom about his career, with the focus being on his songwriting. And these conversations are reprinted here with little or no editorial comments, and they represent a really unique perspective on Tom's entire career. Writer Zollo always wanted to write this expanded edition. He would go to Tom Petty's house every Saturday morning when he was in town, and they would just talk music. Very casual, very cool. Of course, I'm going to devour this one, and I can pretty much guarantee a show about this book. Conversations with Tom Petty as a spotlight title will be coming up in the next couple of weeks. This book is out now. Check it out. One more book, and I saved this one for last for one reason. I read a ton of rock and roll books, and when one sticks out like this one, it gets me fired up. The premise and the way that Robyn Hithcock writes really has me intrigued. That's who and what this book is about. It's Robyn Hithcock's memoir. It's called 1967. Hitchcock's kind of like a rock and roll surrealist, and the book tells his life story through the year he claimed changed his life, which is 1967. So I'm looking at the back of the book, just looking at the different quotes. There's one from Johnny Marr, and I've noticed, hey, that's Michael Chabon. He left a quote. Michael Chabon wrote one of my favorite non-rock and roll books, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. Really great book, kind of about comic books, and I just love the comic book industry. I love comic book as an art medium. This is such a great book. It's a front row center all the way. Check this book out, The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. But anyways, he left this quote. I wanted to read it. Memorists rarely begin their work with a stroke of genius inspiration, and Robyn Hithcock's ingenious idea to limit his account of his life to the titular year gives his sharp, funny, finely written book an unusually keen, wistful intensity without sacrificing its sense of the breathtaking sweep of time. This just sounds very different, and like I said, I read a bunch of books, a lot of rock and roll books, and I just always looking for something different. So this one caught my eye. It sounds like a quirky read, something ingenious, and sounds like something I can't wait to dig into. Gonna wrap up this week's news with some news that just came out the other day, right before I recorded this, and this is a release of a trailer for the new Dylan biopic called A Complete Unknown, and James Mangold, the producer, just gave an in-depth interview making this film, and it was fascinating. Timothy Chalamet is playing Bob Dylan, a young Bob Dylan, when Bob just comes to New York and just starts out. Trailer features Chalamet singing some of Hard Rain, and Chalamet is actually going to be singing the Dylan parts in this film, and I was really blown away by the performance. It looks great. The way it's filmed is great. And again, Mangold, the way he talks about how much time it took to put this together and what he had to go through to put it together. And he also did get a chance to speak to Dylan. They showed him the script. Dylan made some notes on the script and passed it back to Mangold. He also talked to Chalamet about the part. I think this is going to be fantastic. If it's anything like the trailer, I'm can't wait to see this new documentary. Mangold says he wants to try to get it out by the end of the year, so I'll stay on top of it and keep you updated on any release date. And that gets you all caught up on what's new in the world of rock and roll books and documentaries for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Love talking rock and roll and getting a chance to recommend a few titles for you. Just because the episode is over doesn't mean the conversation is. Join me over on Instagram or Threads or YouTube for more book and doc talk. All right, tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. We'll see you next time in the Rock Talk studio.